Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Danae Evans, and I'm the CEO of CMLS, or the Council of Multiple Listing Services. Wanted to let everyone know we are recording the session today, so please be aware of that, and we'll be able to share it afterwards, but we are recording the session. We are really pleased to still be able to offer you this session today virtually, although we were really excited to see all of your faces in person in San Diego. Obviously, that didn't we're not there, and so I hope everyone is washing their hands and taking care of themselves. And we're still hoping that we can get some engagement today from everyone. It's always a little more challenging when we're virtual, but we've got some good stuff queued up, and I think some good thought-provoking and good conversations ready to go on the virtual process. If you're in the Zoom application, you'll notice that there, and I would definitely encourage you, if you've just called in, if you can log in, it will be a little easier to be interactive that way. If you're in the Zoom application, you'll notice there's a black bar along the bottom. If you kind of hover over it for the chat, raise hands, and a Q&A. So if during the event today, if you have any questions, please utilize the Q&A feature, and we're going to return to those questions. But if you'll please make sure and put that your question is at one of the panelists, or kind of what the context was when you were asking it, because sometimes those get queued up. And that way, when we circle back, we'll know and make sure and ask the question to the right person. And then if you have any general feedback, please use the chat feature versus the Q&A. So with that, we'd like to jump right into our leadership and governance. We had a few options from the day that was queued up for you, but we thought this was one of the most current ones to talk about, one of the most important things that we could still bring to you as part of this information. So first, we're going to hear from Brad Belke. He is the 2020 chair of CMLS, and he's going to go ahead and just kick it off today with introducing and a little bit overview of this current state of our industry. What is it that we're looking to navigate? Why is it the leadership and governance is so important in relation to where is MLS going? What does our future look like? So you're going to hear from Brad here for a few minutes, kind of set the stage for us, and then we'll jump into specific panelists that we have to talk more in detail about the specifics of leadership and governance. So with that, Brad, welcome, and let's share some of your insights on the future of MLS.
Thanks, Danae. I want to thank everybody that's on the call today, too. I know we're in a crazy environment right now. We thought the craziest thing that would happen to MLS this year was the clear cooperation policy, but then all of a sudden we're hit as a nation with this coronavirus pandemic, and obviously that has been the biggest issue du jour, and at least we can be on a phone call today where we can't catch it, so that's always a good thing, that we can have a virtual call and talk through some of these issues. Again, thank you for being on the call. Some of you may or may not be CMLS members, and for those that are not CMLS members, we really appreciate having you here, as well as our current members, and encourage you to get involved and to participate in CMLS activities and best practices as we try to move our industry forward as an organization, which is really an important thing as we see these new policies and rules pop up that affect us. I think nothing really is more important than governance and leadership, and that's where we're focusing this seminar today, is on those two topics. As the world is changing, MLS is changing as well. MLSs and association models are sometimes stuck in a rut of leadership and a rut of old practices that doesn't allow the MLS side of things to move forward in as expedient and efficient of a manner as it needs to move. And so this is a great opportunity today to talk to some of the experts in our field that run excellent MLS organizations, to tell you how they are doing it, how they are navigating the waters of governance and leadership to make sure their MLS can stay at the cutting edge, be the best it can be for the changing models we're seeing in real estate, the future brokers, the brokers who are changing the game for the traditional real estate industry, and how the MLS can keep up with that, both technically and through support. And I think sometimes what we find is we focus a lot on the software package that's offered by the MLS, but as all of you know, the MLS is so much more than that. It's about the training, it's the personal touch, it's getting out to the brokers and the agents, letting them know you're there, helping them navigate the technology and the future issues so that they can be successful in the years to come. And so you're going to hear about how sort of the leadership has not necessarily changed necessarily with people, but how smaller boards of directors, more nimble boards of directors, how associations and MLSs can split their leadership so that the MLS can run at a faster pace than an association. All of those things are really what it doesn't necessarily need to happen, but if your MLS is going to be the MLS of the future and serve their members the way they need to, a lot of changes are going to be needed in the years to come. So I'm pleased today to introduce Nicole Jensen will be here from the Indianapolis MIBOR Association. We'll also have Mandy Dennis from CMLS. We'll later also have Tim Dane from St. Louis MLS, Maris, and someone everybody knows, Art Carter from CRMLS, the largest MLS in the country, to talk about what they're doing in their organizations to really keep them at the forefront of the MLS industry. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the esteemed panelists. Thank you, Danae. Thank you all for being on the call today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brad. This is Nicole Jensen. I'm with the MIBOR Realtor Association and the MIBOR Broker Listing Cooperative, which is just another name for an MLS. So I appreciate being asked to be a part of this. I've presented on governance and leadership a couple of times at these events, and I feel like today we've really tried to take this program and scale it down a little bit to speak to all different models. So we're taking what was going to be a full day, and even this I think was a lot longer. And we have two great people to tell their stories. Just a little bit about myself quickly. I've been at MIBOR for a couple of years. Prior to that, I was in Lincoln, Nebraska. So I have ran all different sizes of associations and MLSs. And I've experienced a lot of different models. So I think that positions me well, I guess, to speak to everybody, you know, to be able to speak to everyone and sort of understand the different ways that things are handled. So with that, I will throw it over to Mandy and allow her to introduce herself and get us started.
Good day, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. I am Mandy Dennis. I am the Member Engagement Coordinator here at CMLS. I have been at CMLS for about a year now. And in my other two past lives, I was actually a real estate broker and an MLS director at a small MLS in North Carolina. So I can relate to most of the issues that you guys go through, and being from a smaller MLS. So let's get started with the webinar. So on today's agenda, we are going to be talking about the differences between association and MLS leaders, the roles of the CEO and volunteer leaders, strategic plans and how they are important, the different types of governance structures and their challenges, and the resources that are available for your use.
So I thought that it would be a good idea just to sort of remind everyone, or to like revisit the importance of like what a good leader is, or what makes for a good leader, what is leading, what is it not. So really sometimes for some it's considered a bit of a position or a position of power. There's a lot of pride, which you should have pride in your work, but it should be more of a looked at as something that is earned, and that you're humbled to be a part of a leadership team. And so it's important for our leaders and ourselves, I think, to remember that this is not about us, but rather about like the greater good of our organizations, no matter your size, and to sometimes gently remind, you know, our leaders and ourselves that our fiduciary is to our organization. And so when we are in governance meetings about MLS, that we need to focus on what's best for the MLS and for the industry as a whole. And like we always say, to make the marketplace work, you know, to make the market work. And that our duty is to that organization when we're serving in those capacities of leadership. So a couple of differences, I think, just to point out, because I know that some of our audience, and even myself included, there are some differences between associations and MLS leaders, and maybe what makes for a good or a more well-positioned leader in those different capacities. So, I mean, we're all here for the same fundamentals, is to make the, to support our realtors, no matter whether it's in the association side or the MLS side. And so we have the same fundamentals, that we're all working for the same basically set of people, or for the same greater good. But association boards, they tend to have a bit of a broader scope of work. As you all well know, there's government relations, advocacy, core standards, industry relations, professional standards, the list goes on and on. We offer education to our members. And so it's a pretty, I guess, diverse set of, of subjects that they approach. And so there may be some that are really well positioned to take on those issues and topics. Whereas with MLS boards, we're a little bit more in our scope of work, we're a little bit more specific and specialized, in that we have to be focused on specifically the MLS and what its job is, how is it best positioned to help our members. It's about the cooperation, the compensation, the community, all of those things. So it's just a little bit of a different role, I guess. The MLS is most likely a for-profit corporation, as we all know. I'm not in every situation, but I'm just speaking broadly. This is usually. And it directs the technology, that drives cooperation. And so it is a little different monster. And then also that really our participants choose to belong to the MLS, and with MLS of choice, and there's also association of choice, but that they're choosing to be a part of that cooperative and choosing to get together and cooperate and compensate. And then that the MLS board isn't, as I guess, a public position, meaning that they don't do as much public outreach. It's more so kind of a little bit behind closed doors, from my experience, and in running the business of the MLS. So those are a few of the differences between association and MLS leaders.
So next, role clarity. So sometimes you need a clarity check of the various roles that's involved in your MLS. And it's really important for everyone to understand what their individual role actually entails. It's a good idea before the incoming president of your board comes in to maybe have an initial meeting and talk about what their perception of what they think they should be doing and their perception of what they think your role is as CEO or director. And then compare that with what is reality, and that will give a clear roadmap of what they should be doing and what their expectations of what you should be doing. We actually, one of the things that we did at our board is we actually took the organizational chart that we had and made it into a poster and put that into the boardroom that basically showed how the organization flowed. And so if there was any question or anything that come up during any board meetings, we could always point to the chart. So it was kind of a picture or something that they had to go by. But basically your volunteer leaders, they oversee the MLS, and they're kind of focused more on the policies and the strategies and making rules and that type of thing. You as the CEO and the staff, you're basically there for day-to-day operations to make those things happen. Whatever the board decides, it's your job to make sure that happens. So strategic plan's a strat plan. So that is a strat plan. I can't stress how important it is. I was in shock when I actually got to my MLS. I was new to the industry, but I knew that every business should have a strat plan. We did not. We did not even have a strat plan. So that was one of the first things that we did. We met, the MLS board met, we created a strat plan. I was hard to basically go through day-to-day operations or to lead without a strat plan if you don't have a plan in place. Think of that as your roadmap to your MLS, or I guess nowadays you would say it's your GPS system, but I would suggest that it be reviewed by your board every year. Make sure all of the directors on your board understands the strat plan. It's a tool to make sure that everyone is achieving and working toward those goals. And you should have measurable steps for each goal that you set. So you make sure that you're achieving those things. It makes it easy for the president and the CEO both to kind of grade the MLS on how well they're doing these things. And your values and your mission statement and your vision, that all needs to tie into the strategic plan. So it's a whole bundle together.
Yeah, I think too, Mandy, even from my experience, like a lot of times the Realtor Association has a strategic plan that includes parts of the MLS or the technology that we're providing, but to actually consider having almost its own strategic plan, that would be obviously work together with the other one, but to have it even more specific to the MLS, I think is also something to consider eventually.
Right, exactly. That's a good point, Nicole, because I think a lot of times with associations and MLSs that's together, you think of the association, and sometimes the MLS, different things like that seems to sometimes get forgotten. It's a forgotten thing. You think of the association needing to have one, but sometimes the MLS gets forgotten.
All right, so governance structures. I think that the most important thing here is that, like the very bottom bullet, is that there's really no right or wrong way. There are so many variations of different models. Of course, we just asked the question there that how many of you are operating in different ways, and half of us, I guess, are operated as a committee of an association of realtors, which I too am that. We are a wholly owned subsidiary, but I have experience being a committee of an association. Our two speakers are more regional in capacity. So I think that most importantly, no matter what your model currently is to really look at it critically and to think about what best serves your membership. We have a lot of movement going on in the industry right now. And sometimes all of that happens so quickly that we don't take time to look at it and say, okay, is what we've been doing for years still working for us today? Not that we're going to talk about consolidation, shared services and all of that, but just to take an assessment in a moment to discuss with your leadership and any stakeholders to really determine the needs, if any, is it working? Do we need to review it? Is there a different structure? Is there a different ownership? It's not always about the ownership, but actually what is best for the marketplace. And really, what problem are we trying to fix? Do we even have a problem? Maybe your governance structure is just fine the way it is, and that is okay too. It's more so just having that critical thinking and doing a little discovery on how we got here, how long has it been this way, because it's so easy just to continue to set the next meeting date and not to actually think, wow, it's been many years and this has just always been the way it has been here. I know when Shelley Specchio and I, came to my board, we really did a deep dive on especially the MLS side of things because it had just operated the way it was for so long. And so we were really all about really not separating, but giving the MLS, or what we call a BLC, its own focus, and having that board of directors be much closer in the operations of how we're running things. And that was a real shift. Previously, they had the Realtor Association Board of Directors making those decisions, and that was fine too. There was nothing, it wasn't broken at all. It was just, man, do we need to realign, and is the our current state and all of the services that we are offering, would it be better served by a group that is more focused on the MLS's needs, so that they can be even more plugged in and engaged in MLS specific governance versus trying to do all of the things I listed earlier, while trying to also be highly educated in the MLS world, because I work in this every day. And as we all know, it's even difficult for those of us who do this for a living to really know everything there is that we need to know. And then just to empower those people. And really, I mean, back when we also arrived, that they didn't serve for very long. So are the terms correct? All of those things, just to at least open up and start talking about the way that you're governed. So there are some structure challenges, I think, that, like Brad mentioned, one that I think we all might experience on a bit of a regular basis is the inability to be nimble and to make quick decisions, yet well thought out decisions. And by that, I think that there's times when committees don't meet every month. And so it could be that the day after a committee meets, you have an issue that comes up, and basically we say to our members, well, the committee meets in a month and a half. And really, as an MLS, it's less effective because our business model and what we do for our members is moving so quickly that to delay decisions like that really is a disservice to our members and to really the home buyers and sellers that they serve. And so just to try to look at things and say, how can we be more nimble? Can we offer, could we get together virtually, which I think that we're all sort of working on right now, is how do we work virtually, and to look at opportunities in that way. There are a lot of political, challenges and pressures, different shareholders coming in with their own, sides or opportunities for them. And does that conflict in some way? There are so many different pressures that we just need to really be aware of them. And then making sure really that our leaders know that when they're serving in that capacity, that they're putting the organization and the MLS first in those moments. While, I mean, it's very natural and it's really difficult not to think about your brokerage when you're serving in a volunteer leader role, but to make sure that they understand that really it's about serving the MLS and having the flexibility to, while being able to go back to their companies and discuss these decisions, but also be able to make nimble and quick decisions. So that's some of the structure challenges.
So the board of directors, so this is that group of people that usually comes in your life once a month, and you're either welcoming at the door or you're ready to just close the door behind them when they leave. These folks, these are some of the things that you need to consider with your board. Size in this case does matter. You may have too few of directors on your board, so you don't have enough representation to have a good poll of stuff. You may not have enough to manage. So if you have too many people on your board, it can become cumbersome. There may be too many viewpoints. Your meetings get out of control, and it's just hard to manage. You need to make sure that you start on time and that you end on time. We actually had a president that we knew that each meeting that he was going to be 5 minutes late. So we already knew that ahead of time and had our president-elect take over and start until he got there. And we just knew those things. You have to be, wise of their time, wise of your own time. But these folks are volunteer leaders. They don't have to serve. So be conscious of their time and talk about the action items only. Don't, kind of keep the chit chat to a minimum. Sometimes people get in the room and they'll get off topic, and then 30 minutes later, you've went down a rabbit hole that you didn't need to go down. So keep on track. Executive committee, you need to figure out and make sure it's clear to everyone what their authority is. who serves on the executive committee. I know many times that some of the other directors on the board, sometimes their feelings get hurt because the executive committee made a decision and they could make that decision, but the rest of the board did not realize that they had that authority. So make sure that's clear to everyone. And then the ability to be able to act between meetings. Sometimes you cannot meet at a certain time. And if there's an emergency that comes up, then basically you have to be able to act. Maybe it's a vote by email. We had stuff like that come up from time to time, and we had to take a vote by email. So those are things that you need to figure out. And then your makeup of the board. Sometimes you need to think, just because it's always been this way, this may not be the best way. So you need to consider maybe changing your board up. There's business leaders in your community that would have great viewpoints that would be outside of the industry that you can invite to serve on the board. We actually had a seat at the Chamber of Commerce, and the Chamber of Commerce CEO actually sat on our board. So we did an exchange. It was nice because they could see what was happening in the real estate community, and we were aware of what was happening out in our community. Brokerage size and the market share. Do you have reps from all size brokerages? Do you have too many people maybe from one firm? Those are things to consider. And broker-owned reserved seats. Our MLS board was all made up of all broker owners, except we kept 2 seats available for an individual subscriber to serve on the board. And also we kept another seat open because our association president served on the MLS board and vice versa. So keep those things in mind. The executive committee, what is the prerequisites to serve on an executive committee? What kind of roles do they need to go through in order to get to serve on the executive committee? And term limits, that's very important. You want to keep the term limit long enough so the folks who's serving on the board understands the history of what has happened in the past years, but you don't want to keep someone on the board too long that no change is happening. We had that situation at times where we had people that had served on the board for several years, and they got to the point where they didn't want to make any kind of change. It didn't matter what it was about. You couldn't even get the the proposal on the table before they said, well, if it's not broke, let's not fix it. So you have to think of those type of things. And then your executive leadership, well, how many times can they run? Can they run again? And how long is their term? So very important things to consider if you're thinking about changing the structure of your board.
So let's take a look at the future. I mean, we all know about the increased core standards for association, and assuredly that is also applies to us as MLSs. Whether or not it is an actual requirement, we're all being held to a higher standard to be able to best serve our members in these changing times, just with the different business models and really making real estate, there are companies that cross borders and such. So we all are aware of the need to best serve our members, no matter what it takes. Mandy's going to talk about the best practices and self-assessment, but what does the future hold? Vendors are even reaching out to some of us and some of the MLSs across the country and saying, we can no longer responsibly serve you as an MLS, and you need to look to other solutions. And so by that, that's even a pressure, an outside pressure that's coming in, not by choice, but by even our vendors' decisions to say that it might be best for you to partner with someone. Other MLSs reaching out and retailing their services that they built. Not all of us, including me, have resources to have developers or programmers on staff. And so we look to other MLSs to see what they're doing. No matter what size you are, you can always learn from and even benefit from the strengths that others have that they're offering their members. And maybe they're willing to even retail that to you. I worked when I was in Palm Springs, California, we had a wholesale MLS that we actually purchased our MLS services from another. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of diversity that's out there, and that we just all need to be aware that the future is going to be, bright, but it's also going to maybe look differently than it does now.
So CMLS has some great tools for you guys to use. The CMLS self-assessment tool is available to our members on the CMLS website. You will have to log in to start this assessment. Basically what it is the assessment is broken down into our individual best practices, and you will answer questions about your MLS and your current practices of what you're currently doing. And then you will be given a summary at the end, and it will give you ideas of what you need to improve upon or maybe what you're doing well. My suggestion would be to sit down and to do it, and then to maybe let your MLS president sit down and do the tool as well, or maybe maybe your MLS staff. Everyone's going to have a different viewpoint of what you're doing well. You may think that you're killing it in one area, but just to find out that your president doesn't think so, or your staff doesn't think so. It's a great report to share with your board. It kind of, again, goes with the roadmap of what areas that you need to improve and areas that you're doing well, and you need to pat yourself on the back for that. So a good guide, a great guide for that. We have CMLS best practices resources. This is available to anyone under research on our CMLS website. These documents, they're valuable documents that have been put together. They have been put together with your peers along with CMLS staff. They give you guidelines of what best practices are, and there's also checklists that you can use to see what maybe you're doing or things that maybe of what you should be doing. The CMLS Leadership and Governance Survey is also available on our website to anyone under resources. This was done last year. It was compiled from surveys that was sent in from our membership. And basically it is regarding everything from how long board meetings last to have you ever had a structural change at your MLS. So very interesting things to read to see what's going on with your peers.
So some final thoughts. I think that when we deliver this type of content, it sometimes sounds like, how am I ever going to do that with the resources that I have available? So, I mean, there are outside facilitators, and they are wonderful. I've worked with many, many of them. And if that works with your budget and your resources, then by all means, I would highly recommend it. I know that not everyone, has that in their current budget. So even reach out to peers like myself or any of the people on this call and ask for their help and reviews. Use the checklist. Scale solutions to fit. So, I mean, even if you can't bring in one of the national facilitators to help you with looking at your governance model and strat plan and all of that, there are local facilitators. We had one in Lincoln. I actually used them a number of times in Lincoln because I couldn't afford to fly somebody in. But ask a friend. AEI year-round and the MLS directors and staff on Facebook, those are two really good resources. They're Facebook groups that are closed to AEI year-round is one, and then MLS directors and staff is the other. And a lot of times, not only are our peers on there to ask quick questions and to ask for help, but even, Renee Glacia and Rodney Ganschow are there as well, as they call themselves, the RGs now, which cracked me up. They're there, and obviously Danae and her entire staff are enormous resources. you know, if you can find somebody to help you and be a mentor. I've had so many amazing mentors in my MLS career that have really shaped who I am and have guided me along this path and have always been there for me if I've had questions, especially where these really, you know, broad brush issues are concerned. So let's all keep calm and MLS on, which is really timely for the current status of our environment.
Thank you, Nicole. So to conclude the last part of the webinar, we will have two CMLS members that will be sharing their own stories of governance changes at their organization. Tim Dane, who is the president and CEO of Maris, and Art Carter, who is the CEO of California Regional MLS. Welcome, guys. I will turn it over to Tim now.
All right, thanks. So first thing I want to say is that I realized that a lot of you on the call, it looked like 50% of you operate your MLS as a committee and about 34% are some version of a wholly owned association model. So while Art and I both work at larger regionals that service multiple associations, I think we both understand the challenges, and I'll try to break down sort of our journey into bite-sized pieces that could fit for any size organization. So I arrived at Maris in November of 2017, and by May of 2018, 7 months later, I was asking the board of directors to consider changes in our governance and ownership structure. I asked them to form a task force, and what I'll tell you about is the journey after that task force was formed. So I'll go through sort of the strategic objectives we empowered them, the strategic objectives we came up with, the information that we empowered them with to have discussions, how those meetings went, how long they went, and then I'll review sort of our current model, where we ended up, and talk about some of the outcomes of making those changes. So we started with the following strategic objectives. First, analyze the difficulties in our current governance structure and look at the unchecked growth of our board of directors. Because as Maris expanded, we expand by adding shareholders. And at the time, we had grown to 14 total shareholders. The way our board was structured at the time was that every shareholder had a direct appointment to our board. So that automatically made 14 board members appointed by the association. However, the brokers on the board that were elected always had to have one more person than the shareholders. So you have 15 brokers, 14 associations for 29, and then they had a weird revolving board seats that were added anytime associations of a specific size were added. Long story short, we ended up with 32 board members when I arrived here, which was a challenge to manage. The second strategic objective was to promote a culture of professional development in our volunteer leadership by enhancing sort of their industry knowledge and their operational knowledge. Third, we wanted them to consider how both market area and competency should impact our board makeup. Maris covers a very large geography, which I know that even some of the smaller or medium-sized association-owned MLSs cover various geographies from urban to rural, depending on your geography size and not your member size. So we wanted to review that and review how adding specific competency requirements might also impact that board makeup. Fourth, we asked them to review the current outreach strategy and enhance our non-board member broker engagement and association leadership engagement to find other ways than board seats to make sure that people had a voice within the decision-making process. And then the last strategic objective we had was to engage member perspective on how the changes to governance might enhance Maris's ability to be more nimble and more responsive to the market needs and provide some greater transparency into our decision-making process. So those were the strategic objectives that we came up with when the task force was formed. We provided the task force with a lot of information and a lot of, I guess, ability to do their job. So the first thing we did was we hired an outside meeting facilitator. No staff was participating beyond setting those initial strategic objectives or providing requested information. So I was never in that room unless they called me into the room to ask specific questions. We felt that was important because we wanted it to be a member-driven change. T360 was hired to provide some research and gather gather some intelligence about private ownership and governance for MLSs across the country. And we did all size MLSs. I think in total, we had a survey sent out to about 40 different MLSs across the country, and about 30 of them responded with detailed information. We also conducted several in-market broker interviews with task force members to going to other competitor brokerage offices to do interviews with those brokers to collect their thoughts on Maris governance and how it might impact their businesses. The Maris also held a shareholder association executive forum, which is something you may or may not have to do depending on how many associations you serve. But we had the 14 shareholder association executives come in, provide their input and guidance, specifically on how they would view us separating ownership from governance, because the 14 associations own our business, but they didn't necessarily have to be involved in all aspects of governing the business. We also asked all members of the task force to read and discuss the Race for Relevance. So for about a month, we became a book club, bought everybody a copy of that book, had them read it, and they sat in the room as any book club might and talk about the different aspects of the Race for Relevance. If you've never heard of the book, it's a great book that has generated significant interest in governance restructuring, especially for associations across the country. The last thing we provided them with was the CMLS leadership and governance best practices. I don't say that just because I'm on the call, but since we were in the mode of being a book club, we decided to have them all read that and discuss that as well. So while they were doing all of this, I think it was over the course of about 11 months, they reviewed, analyzed, documented, and then made a recommendation to the board of directors. Their recommendation required that Maris entirely rewrite our bylaws and our shareholder agreements. So it was not a small recommendation that they came up with. We then spent about 5 months in association shareholder meetings all through Missouri and Illinois to gather what was needed for us, which was 100% total approval to modify those documents. Since each shareholder had its own shareholder agreement, every one of those agreements had to change, so we needed 100% buy-in from the large and the small associations. Finally, in October of 2018, we announced our governance and ownership restructure, which became effective January 1st of this year. So this is pretty fresh for us. Our current model, what we came up with, we have a board of directors and a shareholder council, two different bodies, I guess, that operate here. The board of directors is 100% broker now. Every shareholder gets an appointment to the shareholder council. This was an important separation of governance and ownership for us. Shareholders no longer have appointments to our board of directors. And that was primarily because the group, the task force, felt that it would be difficult, or it has been difficult, for those shareholder appointments to not be there representing their shareholder. Since they have to, on a board of directors, represent the company or do the fiduciary duty of the company, it's a conflict of interest in a lot of ways. So by providing a shareholder council, we provide a space for the associations to own the company and to talk about those things that matter to the owners of the company, thus giving up their seat on the board of directors and being able to represent their association's view transparently. So our board of directors now is made up of the 3 largest brokers. They get a direct appointment, and that's largest by count, not by volume. They get a direct appointment. Their appointment is annual, and they have no term limit at all. So we build a little bit of, I guess, a continuity of leadership by having those people that are appointed annually not need to term out ever. They can just be reappointed in perpetuity. We also have 3 that are, I should say this too, to get the 3 appointed seats, the 3 largest brokers gave up their ability to vote in all elections. They had enough members that they could vote anybody they wanted to into any seat and essentially dominate the board. By giving them a direct appointment, they gave up their right to vote in open elections. We then have 3 elected members that represent marketplaces. The task force really felt that if we were going to have representation on our board, it should be by marketplace. So they defined the marketplaces as urban, suburban, rural, and resort. And we have seats set aside for each. So we have 3 elected brokers from the urban and suburban marketplace. We have 2 that are elected from the rural and resort marketplace. And then we have 1 seat elected from every state Marist serves that is not Missouri. So right now that includes Illinois. And then the shareholder council, which is the shareholder appointed board, they get to appoint 1 person as a representative of all shareholders to our board of directors. We also have 0 to 2 non-voting, what we call strategic board member seats. So they do not have to be filled. They are currently filled. We have 1 filled by Craig Cheatham, the CEO of Realty Alliance, because we have a large strategic objective to be more broker-focused, broker-driven, and we're wanting to raise the awareness of brokerage challenges across the nation. So Craig Cheatham fills that role. And then we have another one, which is John Mosey, the CEO of North Star MLS, because Marist is heavily vested in something called the Common Data Platform, which is a database that they built. So those 2 fill very strategic seats for us. And then I, as a CEO, am a non-voting board member. So that's how we're structured. We have the board of directors and the shareholder council. The outcomes of that, what we've kind of experienced so far. First, the board of directors is much more operationally focused. They're involved with service levels of the company, strategic objectives, financial performance against the budget, pretty much anything that has to do with running the company or enacting the strategies of the company, setting the strategies. We've really invested in their development because we've downsized it so dramatically. We've been able to make a deeper investment into how we develop board members. So they get subscriptions to industry news, paid opinion blogs. A larger percentage of them travel to industry events or attend via remote access. And we like to seed experts now into our board meetings for specific topic presentations. So we really have set aside a large portion of funds compared to what we used to invest in their development as better leaders. The shareholder council itself is a very ownership-based board, so they're involved in like budget approval, our financial performance, growth, mergers, acquisitions, the things that an owner of a company should be vested in. Those are the powers that we've granted to the shareholder council. We notice that more people participate at the board and at the shareholder council since they're smaller. Their experience levels are starting to elevate due to the engagement of the meetings. We also shifted away from like the traditional board packet that many of you might use or board agendas. We now write a narrative agenda. So typically our agenda is somewhere between 30 and 80 pages long, and it's written like more like a short novel might be. We certainly call out areas where we need action taken, but by providing the information in that manner, it generates a lot more, I guess, a more elevated or a more knowledgeable discussion about the topics, the opinions that are held out there, and the positions of other MLSs. So that's sort of where we're at. It's fairly unique. I should say that because we went to a marketplace-based board with the urban, suburban, rural, and resort, we did not dive into creating district maps or anything like that. Our bylaws called out the U.S. Census definitions for each of those. So each of those has a population count that puts them into urban, suburban, rural, or resort. And when somebody applies for one of those open seats, we simply look at their book of business and make a decision on whether or not most of their business is conducted in one of those marketplaces or some of their business is conducted. If it is, then they qualify for the seat. If it is not, then we'll ask them to reposition to a different seat. So that's sort of our journey and where we ended up, and I look forward to any questions at the end. Art Carter.
Thank you, Tim. First off, knowing that our situation is somewhat unique, both Tim and I's, I just would like to put some caveats out there that I recognize that, and I'm a firm believer that there is no one-size-fits-all governance model. And I would tell you that we're both firm believers that, and as Tim mentioned earlier in his comments, that any effective governance model is built around voice. And what do I mean by voice? Voice is really the ability for your membership to provide feedback into the decision-making chain. And really when we talk about governance and effective governance, It doesn't really matter what Tim's doing, doesn't really matter what I'm doing. You can take elements of what we're doing and insert it into your circumstance, but any talk about governance really needs to take a step back and figure out a number of different things about your current marketplace. And that things that you really need to figure out are what is the predominant voices you need to listen to in your marketplace? What is the history of governance in your marketplace? I've seen a lot of governance models struggle and fail because they were completely unaware of the history of how people were used to being governed. So I think there's a number of different things that you need to figure out when it comes to changing business models or changing governance models. And, hopefully you can gain some insight out of what Tim has already presented and what I'm going to talk to you guys about. The governance model within the CMLS system has really only had one, change within the last really 40 years. And the first 30 years of the organization, it ran very much the same way, to varying degrees of success. So when I started in 2005, the organization that I was leading had a board of directors made up of one representative from every one of its shareholder organizations. And as such, at the time in 2006, before we started some of our mergers and additional organizations coming on board with CMLS, we had a board of directors of 14 people. It was fairly effective. It was a board of directors that was highly operational, dove into the weeds way too often, and our board meetings were typically anywhere from between 3 and 5 hours. And it was very difficult to have a final decision determined in regards to anything that we were doing at that point. In 2009, we started the process of our mergers and taking on additional organizations and associations to the point where our board of directors swelled to 29 people in the 2011 timeframe. It was even less effective. And one of the problems that we always faced was that getting people involved and willing to spend those 3 to 5 hours once a month was very difficult to get people to get behind that concept and being able to and willing to spend that time. So basically we had really the same board of directors year after year. It was those individuals that really lived for that environment and wanted to participate in those types of discussions. So in 2009, we changed that dynamic. And I talk about the voice piece of it. We really looked at the organization as a whole, and as we were growing, we needed to have different voices sitting around the table. And we went away from having one representative for every association into really a hodgepodge approach to how we select board of directors members. But that hodgepodge was built around that concept of making sure that different voices that really needed to influence the CMLS direction could be heard and heard fairly quickly through our decision-making process. So we went to a 15-member board of directors at that time and recognized going from 29 to 15, it really dramatically affected our ability to make quick decisions. And we went to that element of 15 members at the same time that the board of directors had put together this whole entire process of making sure that the organization was a lot more nimble in its decision-making process. The board of directors, and I'll talk about it a little bit, put together a committee structure that is informatory to the board of directors, and the board of directors places a high level of trust in it. So those 15 members, their makeup, as I said, needed to be representative of the different market segments that we needed to service. As Tim had talked about, the different elements that they've looked at from resort to urban across the board, we were looking more at the makeup of our brokerage community. And we wanted to have voice from our very large brokerages, from our medium-sized brokerages, and from our smallest brokerages. We also wanted to continue to have that local association voice as well. So there's an element that is elected directly by the board of directors, or the board of directors of our individual association organizations. So 8 of those 15 board of directors at the time were elected by our local associations, with the idea that we still wanted to maintain that broker level approach towards our board of directors and have that representation. We didn't want to have a board of directors that didn't have that brokerage voice available to it. So 2 of the 8 people that are elected by our local associations must be broker owners. And we're also very concerned that from a practical standpoint, sometimes our smallest associations, and my smallest at this point has 150 members, we did a carve out that 2 of the 8 directors that are elected by our associations are from smaller organizations. So there are some striations in the board of directors that are built in that allow that voice from the smaller association, and still at the association level allow that brokerage voice. So above and beyond the 8 that are elected by our local associations, we have an additional 4 that are elected by the board of directors. But they have to come from brokerages, either officers or the broker themselves, from brokerages of 100 or more members, 100 or more associates, or those, and 2 are from 100 or more associates, and 2 are from brokerages that have 100 or less agents. So that gives us an additional 4, all brokers sitting around the table. And the final element that we had was a desire to have our large brokerages have a voice in the governance of CMLS. So we also have 3 board of directors members that are elected by the large brokerages to our board of directors. So basically, every 2 years, we have a process by which our top 10 brokers are solicited to have people run for the board of directors, and 3 of the available group of people are elected to our board of directors and serve for a period of 2 years. We do have term limits now on our board of directors. There is unlimited terms on the large brokers, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, but everybody else has a term of 6 years that they can serve on the board of directors at CMLS. And we do that because we want to have some of those voices being moved throughout the system and get new voices and have representative voices appear within our system. So in 2016, the board of directors at CMLS kind of reached the same conclusion that Tim's group did, is that we needed to have some outside voices sitting around the table as well. And they basically added in an additional 2 members to our board of directors. We have 17 total now, and they're outside directors, people that don't have a natural attachment to CMLS, because we do want to hear what's going on across the nation, and we do want to hear differing voices as to things that are constantly in front of our board of directors. Groupthink is probably one of those things that we all are guilty of at some point, and sometimes you need to have somebody in the room telling you that the emperor's not wearing any clothes. So that is a good thing to have. And at this point, we do have an outside MLS director that is filled by Rebecca Jensen from MRED, and an outside broker position that is filled by Bill Lublin from Philadelphia. So when talking about leadership, one of the things that CMLS did is, underneath the old structure, a president or chairman of the board of CMLS could only serve 1 year. And basically, it led us into a situation where there was a constant churn in the leadership positions within CMLS. And the board of directors determined at that point that they really wanted to have a little bit more stability in the leadership positions. And as of today, our chairman of the board can serve for 3 consecutive years, and then must serve in other elements and can't be a chair for 3 years after that. That is to give people an opportunity, but also because this is such a complex industry, and as we've grown, CMLS has become a fairly complex organization, that if you don't have leadership that understands what's going on in the national picture and what's going on locally from just a wide variety of areas, it's just really important to make sure that you have some continuity in that leadership level. So one of the things that CMLS does to maintain and make sure that we have voice coming from each one of our local market segments is we have a very active committee structure. And I know some of you may be groaning at that, but if you handle it in the right way and make sure that they're the right people sitting around the table, it can be a very, very effective way of receiving feedback on the voice of brokers and individuals in different marketplaces. CMLS has a rules committee that we have an expectation that we get subject matter experts from every one of our local associations. Part of the issue that you always face when you get larger and you're not going to have truly representative when it comes at a regional level from each local association, it's all about making sure that people feel comfortable that their voice is still going to be heard. So our committee structure is built so that every association that is a part of CMLS has the right to appoint representatives to each one of our standing committees. And that way we get that local voice. And we make those meetings quick. Typically they meet every other month. And because they're quick and because they're really kind of more action-packed, we don't have any issue of participation at those levels. Like I said, we have an association executive committee, we have a rules committee, we have a committee that deals with operational issues. So the board of directors is, has a group of people that is looking at those operational issues, but doesn't have to dive into them themselves. And then finally, we have our budget and finance committee as well. So as I said, these committee structures allow the board of directors on a consent basis to approve a wide variety of things, knowing that some subject matter experts that are not just staff internally, not really attached to the day-to-day process of doing business in all these local marketplaces. We have a large group of people that have looked through all of these issues, and the board of directors has grown increasingly comfortable with the ability to just on a consent calendar approve everything that our committees have done. So, like I said, CMLS is actively trying to make sure that we are listening and constantly changing policies, procedures, rules across the board, anything operationally. The Clear Cooperation Policy has given us another opportunity to see this in action. We have, as most of you, started the planning process in December, and I'll tell you that our initial Clear Cooperation Policy offering is far different than what it ended up being from a final delivery standpoint. And a lot of that was because we have these mechanisms in place to hear the voice of our membership. And when we proposed things that they were not necessarily happy about, we heard it loud and clear through our mechanisms and were able to make those adjustments prior to the policy being put in place. So hopefully that's been informative. Like I said, I'm not a firm believer that our mechanism would work in every marketplace in the country, but I think there are some elements in what we do that can be informative and hopefully give you guys some ideas as to what might work in your local marketplace. And with that, am I to turn it back over to Betsy or?
Thank you, Art. This is Mandy.
Mandy.
Hi, thank you, Art and Tim, for your input. We really appreciate it. I just wanted to check to conclude our webinar. Does anyone have any questions? I don't think we have any questions today, so I just wanted to review the resources that we do have. Please check out the Council of MLS website for our best practices, our self-assessment tool, and the survey report. If you have any questions about anything, please feel free to contact CMLS at info@councilofmls.org. We will be posting this recorded webinar on our site by Monday. And thank you all. Thank you to Nicole. Thank you to Brad. Thanks to Tim. Thanks to Art. And thank you, everyone. And I hope everyone has a great weekend.